Welcome back. We are broadcasting live here for you from the IAC 2024 show floor. And we do this here from the DLR booth, as you can see. It's the third day of the show, and I have the great pleasure today to have Dr. Simon Stähler of the ETH Zurich here with me. And Simon, or Simon, if we stay in the Anglophone pronunciation. Simon is the course director of the MSc for Space Systems at the Space Systems and Technology Department of Earth and Planetary Science. What a mouthful of a title. How are you doing today, Simon?
Great. It's been a great IAC so far, my first one, so it's the first time I'm getting...
We have an IAC newbie, so...
Been to a lot of scientific conferences, of course. I've been to Space Symposium, and these are two separate worlds, and IAC is really this great mixture of both. You have the scientists, you have the companies, and you have everybody talking together, and it's
absolutely
great.
Do you enjoy it?
Absolutely.
Even on the third day?
I arrived only yesterday, so I'm still fresh.
That's not fair. That's not fair. Okay, what got you in this position that I just described to our audience?
So, where I come from, I'm a planetary scientist. So my motivation is really to do science in space. And what we feel there, of course, that we are in the situation where we were having these huge ESA and NASA missions, and on the other hand, we're having the new space economy. We're having an economy where launch has become a lot cheaper, where satellites as a service, for example, exists, but also where there are a ton more use cases for data from space. And so it's an exciting opportunity, and we really think we need a new education program for that.
Yeah, we come to that in a bit. That's why we are talking. But what is your journey? What brought you in?
I mean, I'm a physicist originally, so I studied physics. And in physics, it's a bit like either you're a theoretical physicist with pen and paper, or you're somewhere in the lab. And at one point, I learned, you can use physics to find out about the interior of planets or the Earth. And I thought, that's cool. You can look into the interior of the Earth or of a planet from the outside using magnetics, seismology, and everything. And so it's cool. I went there and worked on Mars a little bit, the InSight mission, which found the core of Mars and which found Marsquakes. And now it's the next step. Which science can we do now? And so I decided I want to work with students. I want to train students basically for the next generation of space missions. And then we were extremely lucky that Dr. Thomas Surbuchen, the former head of the NASA Science Mission Directorate, he decided to come back to Switzerland, and actually he saw ETH as a place where he can really build a new program. And so together with him and a few other experts, we have built that program and have the first students.
We will dig into that a bit later. But to start with, can you give us a rough overview about Switzerland and space? I mean, we heard a lot, but it's obviously a small country. I mean, you can't compare Switzerland with France or Germany nor the US, of course not. But what's going on in terms of space? We have here at the IAC a wonderful space pavilion, but can you describe the ecosystem a bit for us?
We have the Swiss pavilion with admittedly the best coffee of the IAC, so I heard. But as in many other parts of the economy, Switzerland is a place where you don't have the huge system integrators. You don't have an Airbus in Switzerland or something. But we're having excellent companies on a component level, on the subsystem level. For example, the payload fairings of almost all Western rockets, apart from SpaceX, come from Switzerland, from Beyond Gravity. We have companies building, for example, motors for Mars rovers, for all kind of satellites. But we're not having, we're not having these large companies. We're not building our own satellites yet. Maybe that's even a discussion we're having. Should Switzerland build its own satellites? And at the same time, what we're also having is a relatively large startup scene where you're having specifically companies in the part of Earth observation, using data from space to answer basically the questions of a farmer. I mean, what's the water situation in my field? Do I need to put more fertilizer on that field?
But correct me if I'm wrong. I was invited a few years back when a Cheops mission under this Swiss leadership was to be launched, and they showcased Cheops in the facility in Zurich.
Probably in Bern, I think.
That was
So the Cheops was the first ESA science mission that was led by Switzerland, mainly from Professor Wutz in Bern. And I mean, of course, Bern is a place that has a decade-long heritage in observation, specifically optical. Like all, the European Mars rovers, they all have orbiters. They all have cameras from Bern. Genève on astrophysics, Lausanne engineering, sustainability, and ETH, let's say a bit more downstream science plus engineering. So this is a bit the academic landscape.
You do a perfect transfer to my next question, and that's the educational ecosystem when it comes to space in Switzerland. How does it look like? I mean, I think you mentioned the main university hubs already, but what are they doing in space? I know that ETH does a bit, but not ETH, EPFL is doing a bit, but tell us more about it.
So maybe one step back. I mean, Switzerland, the technical or engineering education is a bit of a special one because all the engineering courses are happening on one of the two national universities, EPFL in Lausanne and ETH in Zurich, and then on the universities of applied sciences. But the cantonal, the state universities, they only do science, not engineering. So therefore, it's only these two big places where you can learn engineering, mechanical engineering, electric engineering, but until now, no aerospace engineering. There was just never a formal aerospace education in Switzerland at a university level. It's not like Germany where you have Stuttgart or Munich or Milano here where we are, Toulouse, which has 60 years.
I just have to break in the stick for Berlin as well. So we have engineering and the TU Berlin as well.
Of course. Sure. One of the most successful small-sat launchers on university level.
And
absolutely.
As a proud Berliner, I have to talk about it.
But yeah, so really it's the aerospace sector and the industry, they were so far recruiting from outside, or they were just hiring mechanical engineers, for example, and training them the space component on the job. And so we talked with companies of all sizes in Switzerland and basically found that what is missing is a knowledge in the space specifics, an understanding of system engineering for spacecraft, which is trained on the job a lot. But for example, if you're a startup or something, you actually need that person coming in with the training. Okay. You can't spend 5 years training a system engineer job, which is why this became one of our foci actually, the training system engineering. That's also a bit of the Thomas Surbuchen thing, the Michigan model, very successful in the United States, which we are trying to, and that's what we're building up new. But then we're taking the engineering expertise that already exists at ETH, for example, in robotics or in controls, and basically taking that together with the newly founded system engineering education in the middle.
So, and we talk about now a new master program, right? Mm-hmm. So, and can you try to structure it a bit? What is this master program at MSc about? I mean, you dropped a number of the fields already, but so how is that structured, this entire course?
So we're...
And what makes it special? I mean, that's the point,
As I said, we're not nice, as a bit our disadvantage, but also the advantage is that we're starting new. We don't have the heritage of 60 years, but which also means we can try to build it for the economy of today and tomorrow, basically. And so we have identified 3 focus areas. I already talked about system engineering. Another one is data science. It's just we're getting tons of data from space, much more than ever before and much more than we can use. So we need to train the students on data science to a certain part. Of course, we don't want them to become full data scientists, but they should understand what typical data formats are, for example, in Earth observations, what typical problems are, what efficient methods for actually processing them are. And then that already leads to the third part, which is sustainability, where the way the new space economy is going in the moment, of course, that's very often a bit of a Silicon Valley, we can do it, let's do it, ask questions later spirit. And this is great, but of course that also means that sometimes it's good to take a step back and understand what are we actually doing to the atmosphere with these space activities, but also which data can we use from space to understand the problems here on Earth. And so that those 2 aspects of sustainability are basically the third pillar of this program.
let's start with the, as you said, mentioned the first pillar, the system side. So can you dive a bit deeper into that? What does it mean? What is the granularity? I mean, it's an engineering course. Yeah, it's not something where you say, okay, we're doing just something on the side. It's really you go into the depths of that. So what does this systems focus means? If you can elaborate a bit on that before we go then to the other two segments.
Let's say what we want the students to be able to do, and we want them to take a certain objective, be it a scientific objective or be it a business case, basically. Understand that objective, understand the constraints under which you're operating, be it political constraints, but of course also physics, money, and everything. And then really understand enough of each subsystem that you're having to be able to do proper trade-off analysis on arriving at a certain mission concept. And we think that this is being taught very often in engineering courses on the side, but our impression is that a lot of the aerospace education goes directly into the classical disciplines, propulsion, controls, aerodynamics. Honestly, this is not something that we can control, yes, but the other two we cannot teach at depth at ETH. If you want to study that, you need to go to Toulouse. But the fourth part, actually getting the subsystems together and understanding the trade-offs, understanding enough of science to not only work with an interface document to the scientist, but actually understand why a scientist wants a certain camera, a certain size. I think that is, if the students understand that and understand a bit of the subdomains, then that actually leads a long way into being able to efficiently design a whole project. Of course, ideally not on a 10-year scale, but on much shorter scales.
That's interesting, especially when you mentioned politics, the politics behind. So how far are you going in that direction? But that's not very typical. That's in an engineering course. You have a political, maybe a geopolitical aspect on it.
I mean, of course, let's say in the end, every space mission works in a certain political environment. It's just that very often it's not explicitly stated, and this is what we try to do. We're bringing in space, even space law to some extent, a small part, but then also bringing it basically the regulatory environment in which we're working in Europe, in which we're working in Switzerland specifically, but then also the typical, let's say, aspects which affect decision-making at ESA, which affect decision-making at NASA, which affect decision-making in the economy, in the startup space. So that's basically the focus of our third semester. First two semesters more technical thing, data, and then the environment. Which I think
that's a very interesting approach, especially having in mind that Dr. Z is behind it with an American touch on. Yeah, I mean it's about a startup culture and how can I launch my own whatever it is and endeavor. Let's talk about the system data analysis, system data in general, what you mentioned as a second pillar. What do we have to understand in that field?
So, I mean, it's two aspects to it. There's the aspect of actually downstream science, downstream business cases, for example, an Earth observation. But of course, there's also the aspect of iteration and design. I mean, we're here at the DLR booth. There's a very nice rocket lab from their reusable rocket. And I mean, we just talked to them about basically their trade-off space between doing simulations, between collecting data during tests, and just with the progress in sensors, the progress in data collection, we're having tons more data these days than we were having ever before during the design phase. At the same time, you need to be able to process that effectively using classical techniques, principal component analysis, but then also, of course, using machine learning techniques to actually find out the interesting and important parts of this whole data set. So this is almost the focus of the full second semester, teaching the students with various industry stakeholders who basically come to us with a data set, or academics who come to us with a data set from Mars, teaching them as we identified 5 analysis techniques that we want to teach them on these specific actual real-life data sets.
So the data analysis is for the technical parts of the spacecraft or the missions. But also then the payload data that you acquire, let's say an Earth observation satellite, that's most easy. So then you have the picture in a few bands, and then what to do with it. How to process it to make it visible, and how far does it go? Because it goes then to explain this data for your client until the intelligence that can be applied on this kind of data.
I mean, of course, we need to be realistic. I mean, it's students are working on it for part of one semester. So what we want is that the students understand the analysis techniques, and if they are interested, of course, say, hey, oh wow, this is a data set I want to work with in my master thesis. And then I go back to the company and, for example, take vibrational data from a certain testing run. And if you talk to the companies, you often find out they're having tons and tons of data somewhere in a drawer, which they didn't have time to analyze, and where they know there might be something interesting in it, actually. And so, hey, we want to unlock that data. And the other thing, I mean, of course, planetary data, it's ridiculous how much money is being spent on planetary missions, and often how little of that data is being used. For example, finding new craters on Mars, as an example. I mean, we can go so much further with modern machine learning techniques in spotting new craters, meteorite impact craters on Mars. And if a student afterwards says, hey, that's what I want to do my master thesis on, great. I mean, I'm a planetary scientist, so that's all the better if I find an awesome student.
Wonderful, wonderful. The last area, and that's something also what is very close to our heart, is sustainability. How do you work then in this area? How much weight does it get? How much do you work with other universities like EPFL, which is being very, very good at that, or very known at that? I don't know if good, but and also life cycle analysis. So how does it all fit together in that area then?
I mean, as you said, I mean, EPFL started that process in Switzerland, I would say, and to some extent in Europe, trying to define metrics for sustainability, actually, because let's say I see two directions in which we do not want to go when talking about sustainability. The one direction is being extremely activist about one specific aspect, and then saying, oh, we cannot use this or this fuel because, and then only focusing on the fuel and not taking into account the bigger picture of which design choices actually come from selecting a certain fuel or being reusable. And the other direction which we do not, where we in Europe probably are, that's always a bit where we're a bit worried, is we are setting up a new very high bar for ourselves. We want to be sustainable, and in the end we have a new thing on which we can produce 100 pages of paper in every step we're taking, while the Americans and the rest of the world are basically running circles around us. And we're affecting our little space activities by so much, while the rest of the world. And so this is where I think the whole concept of life cycle analysis actually should be integrated early into the design process. You're identifying which parts of your design actually have the biggest imprint, for example, on CO2 emissions, on usage of rare materials. And then you're just taking that as one of the requirements in your trade-off study. If I save this and this amount of aluminium, what does it mean for my cost? What does it mean for my CO2 output? And a lot of work has been done on that at EPFL, also at the National Institutes in Switzerland, the Paul Scherrer Institute. And that's really one of the things we want our students to look into when doing design.
As you mentioned, the landing leg here on the DLR booth, I mean, I think that's a very good example of a sustainability approach which comes in good phase, where you say, okay, I want to have my rocket reusability, but if you build a rocket what launches 5 times a year, does it make sense? What is the cost value ratio? If you have rockets like Elon is doing it, launching once a week, it's a different ball game. But okay, fair to say he started also at one stage. So, and I think we find many of these areas in the entire space sector where you say, okay, as you said, where is the trade-off here? Great. So, and I mean, no,
And
go ahead.
And of
No,
course,
go ahead.
one aspect that you touched upon is orbital debris. And I mean, there are Swiss companies like ClearSpace actually thinking about removal of orbital debris, or Astroscale, right? Opposite of us here. Not a Swiss company, though. And orbital debris, of course, I mean, that's basically the most obvious topic of sustainability. My feeling is that this is a topic that is where everybody is so aware of, that this is, apart from anti-satellite weapons tests, a topic that the world is already addressing. Other topics like the question of how much aluminium are we bringing back into the upper atmosphere by deorbiting 1,000 Starlink satellites a year, we even starting to touch that. And
absolutely.
so sustainability is a lot of...
Humanity is good in pushing these problems away to the next generations to come. And as you said, if I have 30,000, 50,000 satellites in space, they will come back sooner or later, as they are not behind the geo belt, as we know. But can you help me to understand a bit more this entire concept of a life cycle analysis in space projects? Is that, I mean, there's the theoretical concept, and then there's reality. How big is the gap, and how we bridge that?
And that's, I mean, that's actually where we're, I mean, on one side we're educating students, but together with EPFL and others, we're actually doing research on that. I mean, where do we need to focus on? Because as you say, you can, even life cycle analysis, you can go down into the rabbit hole on one specific thing. I mean, do I get my aluminium from this country or this country? Okay, but that's probably doesn't matter as much as whether, so that's where we need to actually, and that's an active field of research. I feel this is, in the space sector, so far not being touched upon enough.
I mean, we have this situation, and that's why I'm asking about it in other sectors. I mean, Europe, Germany is moving forward and having this life cycle analysis in your value chain analysis, or no, it's your supply chain, not value chain, like your pardon, the value chain analysis. Again, the supply chain analysis, in your entire setup. But I know that many of the smaller companies, especially, are not happy with that. Not by the concept, but by the applied bureaucracy then in that. And I think that's something. And we talk about the businesses are at the end of the day on the competitiveness of Europe towards the world, towards the States, towards China, towards India. So, and I think, as you said, we might be in few areas a bit too constrained about because we do want to do it right.
No, as I said, that's a bit the second failure mode of sustainability, that we're basically binding ourselves, or us as Europe, in a certain corner with bureaucracy, and it's just adding another layer of bureaucracy. But this is why, at least what I want to train the students in, is actually having that as a natural part of the trade-off process that you're doing anyway. And basically having an eye on that, understanding which of my decisions affect what.
Right.
Of course, later, the question of what is regulated, that's a separate question. And of course, I don't want regulation that basically requires you, as I said, to produce another 200 pages of documentation about where your aluminium came from in the first place. But what I want the students to equip me with is basically the tool to be able to even think in that concept. Because it gets even worse. An even worse thing is if you didn't train somebody on that early on, and then later slap them with regulations, and then they do it, and it's not natural for them, and then it becomes really, as you say, this awkward process of the European Union threw another regulation on us.
I know.
That I don't really understand, and so I'm just following the letter of what is written in the regulation.
As we don't want to shy away potential students to this program, we want to invite them, we want to excite them about it. Let's talk about missions. Let's talk about the real stuff they can do and they have done in the past. So it's not theory, it's not just for the papers or for the exams. It's really what can you do, what have you done, and what is the future for the students that are about to apply.
So ETH has always been quite strong in providing, let's say, for example, electronics to space missions. The InSight mission comes to mind on Mars. I mean, there was a 2 Martian year, 4 Earth year geophysical observatory on Mars, found out a ton of things, how large the core of Mars is, where Mars quakes are happening, where meteorite impacts are happening. We delivered the electronics for that, and we did a large part of the science for that. And that mission is over since a year or so. We're very sad, but we want to move on, and together with the students move on, thinking, hey, which science questions are open now? Which mission would I need next? Basically, once Mars sample return is done, where do I want to figure out whether there's volcanism on Mars, whether there's maybe ice-induced, water-induced quakes even on Mars? That's one thing. Then the big ESA mission where we're playing a large role in is the LISA mission. So the LISA, L-I-S-A, the
gravitational wave mission.
Exactly. So these 3 spacecraft flying in 2 million kilometer distance from another, measuring their relative distance, seeing whether the whole fabric of space-time is being deformed by black holes colliding somewhere in the distance. It will be one of the largest missions that ESA has ever done. ESA and LISA, it's ESA now, launch in the 2030s. We're basically building the foundations for that right now. We're developing parts of the front-end electronics for the spacecraft. And then thinking beyond that, large missions, for example, to see the atmospheres of exoplanets, the so-called LIFE mission that our physics department is pushing. But then we also want to be small and nimble-ended, things that actually the students can see in the time while they are at ETH. We're having a great robotics department, the Robotic Systems Lab, and they are very good in LECT robotics. And we think that for a lot of situations on the moon and on Mars, LECT robotics is actually the way to go. Not if you have a rover that needs to drive kilometers and kilometers. Wheels are great for that. But if, for example, you want to go just to the side of a meteorite crater where you have very steep slopes and a lot of rocks lying around, then legs actually bring you further. You see it on the images from the Apollo mission. Sometimes you see the wheels, the tire tracks going to the side of a crater, and then you see the footsteps of the astronauts, of course, because you can't drive into the crater. And we think that lava tubes, so that's giant holes, caves in the lunar subsurface, that's a place where maybe one day astronauts will live, actually, seek shelter from radiation. But it's a place we need to figure out how to get there, actually, and that's dangerous terrain. You don't want to go there with a huge rover. And so that's maybe the sweet spot where our robot can walk. And that's a mission that we are developing with students, robotics students, but also our new space students.
But I think that's a very, very important point you made, is if students are engaged in a mission, and the students are there for 3 years, 4 years, whatever the time is that they need for the masters. What can they really achieve? What can they see? Can a mission fly? Or if I work today in a mission, will that fly in 20 years? And the students doing something and say, oh yeah, once upon a time I've done something in this mission.
I mean, let's say space is huge. If you want to work on Jupiter or Saturn, that's you do one mission your whole lifetime, basically, and you plant the seed for the next mission.
Fair point.
But of course, Earth observation, I mean, look here, there are hundreds of companies here at IAC who will basically deliver your CubeSat to space for a certain price, and they are taking the launch, they're talking to SpaceX or to another launcher company. And so that's of course another thing. We want basically our students to be able, be it CubeSat, be it microsats, we'll focus on Earth observation, and that's something you can do within a time scale of 2 years. Cool. And then these lunar missions, that's more a 5 to 10 year time scale, but it's still something where students can do a significant part of the design process, and maybe if they do a PhD, even of the analysis. And I think we're in exciting times here. You can do a lot as a student. Now ETH Berlin, of course, they did it already. They're doing it all the time, but
that's right.
We want to learn.
You talked about heritage. Yeah, they have this last 20 years plus 30 years of heritage in that, no doubt. So now it's a time to talk about how can a student apply, how many students do you expect, what are the costs involved, so the rules of the road.
So we started that program this summer, like 4 weeks ago. We actually had the communications class this week. This was the first year only students from Swiss universities, more for bureaucratic reasons. The next year, next summer, we'll start with a cohort of students from all international universities. So the time to apply is now. The time window for applications will start 1st of November, goes until the end of November. Send in your CV, your certificate of the courses you did. Send in a recommendation letter. Hey, if you already did something at ESA, at the company, tell us about it. We're really looking for students who are, I mean, even if they don't have a background in aerospace engineering, if they're just excited about working in the new space economy. I mean, write us about that. We are selecting international applications during spring, and then, we're starting next year, next summer, together with them.
Very interesting.
And one more word. I mean, given that it's ETH, as ETH is a large university, and so basically it's an accredited course. That's what our internal department is doing. So we don't need to go to an external agency and get a full accreditation process like you sometimes need to do if you're starting at a smaller university.
Very cool. And what are the class sizes you envision?
So we started this year with 30. 28 to be precise, students. We had 100 applications. We chose 30 out of them, and we will stay with 30 for another year, let's say, just because that is a size where I know the name of everybody. I know the backgrounds. I mean, we have physicists, we have earth scientists, we have mechanical engineers. I need to understand what they know, what I need to tell the teachers, what the students know. We'll probably stay with some 30 in the next year, just to keep it manageable. And then, I mean, let's see how many applications we have and whether we're growing 50, 100.
How many semesters are these?
It's 4 semesters, 120 credit points.
4 semesters, so 2 years.
Yes, 2 years.
Okay, then.
So, one of the, I mean, we have at ETH, we have 3 and 4 year master's programs. At EPFL more 3 years, but this is a classical 4-year master's program. And you go out with a Master of Science and Space
4
Systems.
years or 4 semesters?
4 semesters.
Okay.
2 years.
Okay. Then
now
I got it. And ETH is a federal university, and so you have just the basic course cost for the courses. So it's not a private university, right?
I think some Mars rovers driving past us, or there was a lot of noise in the background.
Yeah.
So it's let's say it's continental European standard, so 700 francs per semester. Of course, you need to take into account that the cost of living in Switzerland may be higher than in some other places, but it's not like we're charging international students thousands of francs per year.
Okay, so if you want to apply, then it's 1st November to end of November for next year summer, right?
Exactly.
Perfectly. So
moderate student fee, 700 francs per semester,
and a pretty cool
4 years semester.
And a pretty cool campus in the city.
Yeah,
that's something.
But we're also having a new innovation park outside the city, which is great because it's a ton of hangar space to actually do hands-on work. You didn't mention it.
Right.
We want the students to build small satellites, drop them from balloons maybe, and have them land.
So last point, what are the actions now on your end after the IAC?
Going back to teaching. I think next week we're having propulsion. We're having a very good teacher from Airbus talking about propulsion, about the work that he has done on Orion, on the Orion propulsion system that went to the moon. And then, preparing for the second semester and the data science class. And it's exciting for me to see which data sets are out there and how we can actually train the students on them.
Wonderful. Sounds very good. Thank you very much for your time, Dr. Simon Stähler from the ETH in Zurich. With that, we say goodbye for today. If you want to see us live tomorrow, 11 o'clock for our morning show, we wish all of you a wonderful evening here at the IAC or wherever you are. And with that, SpaceWatch out.